I started an affair because I was lonely, but it backfired spectacularly. My husband caught me in the act at a red light. Karma caught up with me. I experienced the literal meaning of karma slaps hard and not in a good way. I'm broke, I've ruined my marriage, and I got caught in the absolute worst way. Some backstory so you understand. My name is Alicia, I'm a 35-year-old woman, and I'm married to Dave, a 36-year-old. My husband Dave and I have been married for about 6 years. We met at university and it felt like destiny brought us together. He was charming with a smile that could light up a room and I was totally smitten. We hit it at first, spending all our time together laughing, studying and just enjoying each other's company. After we graduated, we moved to the city and started building our lives, but somewhere along the way things started to change. Life got real, you know. We got caught up in work, bills and all the other stuff that comes with it. Before we knew it, we were drifting apart as adults. I started feeling lonely and lost, craving something more. Then I met this guy who made me feel alive again, even if it was just for a moment. Looking back, I know it was a mistake, but in that moment, it felt like the only way to break free from the emptiness I was feeling. I worked at a boutique and it was an absolute blast. Sure, I didn't make as much money as Dave, but it gave me some extra cash to treat myself. Plus, being surrounded by trendy clothes and friendly colleagues. The workers made every day feel like a party. Meanwhile, Dave was always swamped with work. He was a big shot at his company and made the big bucks, but barely had time to breathe. He was constantly dashing from one meeting to another, trying to keep up with his job. I respected his hustle, but we didn't get to hang out as much as I'd like. Dave made a lot of money, almost 10 times what I made, and so he took care of most of the bills. He handled the rent, utilities, and all that. I had a bit more spending money from my job for treats like new shoes or a girls' night out. Dave gave me money, but I didn't want to stay at home and be bored all day, so I picked up my job. I always wished Dave could kick back more often, but I knew his job was important. When we did get a chance to chill together, whether it was a cozy night in or a spontaneous date night, it reminded me that love beats dollars any day. Well, that was until I met Richard while working at the boutique. I met Richard on his first day as a new guy on the team. He had this vibe that just drew people in. Richard was friendly, upbeat, and always with a smile on his face. What really made Richard stand out was his fashion sense. He just knew what looked good on people, whether it was finding the perfect pair of jeans or a killer dress. He had this knack for picking out stuff that made everyone look and feel awesome. It was like he had this magic touch. Richard's boutique became a popular destination for customers who were drawn to his style tips and friendly demeanor. He was like the main attraction, pulling in crowds and showcasing his talent effortlessly. As time passed, I noticed Richard paying more attention to me, offering coffee, chatting, and really listening when I talked. It was nice having someone show genuine interest in me. What really caught my attention was how Richard started complimenting my clothes. He had this keen eye for fashion, so if he said I looked good, I knew I was rocking it. It made me feel confident and appreciated, especially in a place where style was everything. I couldn't deny that I enjoyed the attention from Richard. Sure, I was married, but it felt good to have someone notice me and make me feel special. He was just so friendly and easy to talk to. It was hard not to be drawn to him. Of course, not everyone in the boutique was thrilled about our growing closeness. I could feel the envy from the other sales associates and even some of the customers, but I tried not to let it bother me. I knew where my heart belonged, even if Richard's attention was a tempting distraction. As Richard's attention continued, I found myself enjoying it more and more, despite being married. I couldn't deny the thrill of someone he made me feel special, like I hadn't in a long time. I decided there was nothing wrong with enjoying the attention. It was just harmless flirting. I told myself that Richard knew I was married, so he wouldn't cross any lines. I was overthinking it. He just wanted to be friends. I wanted to believe it. As Richard and I grew closer, we exchanged personal numbers and started. It was great talking outside of work with someone to share my thoughts and feelings with, but I had this nagging voice in the back of my mind telling me to tread carefully. I ignored it, though, as Richard and I continued talking. Our conversation started to cross boundaries, but we managed to play it off as innocent banter. It was thrilling and dangerous all at once. We had a lot in common. We liked the same things, laughed at the same jokes, and found ourselves drawn to each other in ways I hadn't anticipated. Then one day Richard suggested we hang out at his place to watch a movie. I agreed. His apartment was modest compared to the spacious house Dave and I owned, but I didn't mind. I didn't want to risk inviting Richard over to our place with its security cameras and nosy neighbors. Our neighborhood may have been it was quiet, but I knew gossip travels fast. We settled in with a bowl of popcorn and I found myself enjoying the simple pleasure of watching a movie with Richard. I couldn't remember the last time I had done this with Dave. Richard and I laughed, we cried, and we shared our thoughts on the film with an openness that felt liberating. But as the night went on, things started to feel different. Our jokes got a little flirtier, our touches lingered a bit longer, and I couldn't ignore the chemistry between us. It was exciting, it was scary, and I should have stopped, but I didn't. I knew I should have put a stop to it, but I couldn't resist the pull. Richard and I crossed a line. We had sex, and I cheated on Dave. He was away as usual, closing some big deal. I didn't rush home in the morning. The guilt weighed heavy on me, but I found myself blaming Dave. If he had been around more, maybe I wouldn't have strayed. It was a mess of emotions for me, guilt, regret, and anger, all tangled up together. I knew what I did was wrong. I knew it was wrong, but part of me couldn't help but feel justified. Dave was always buried in work and he left me feeling lonely and neglected. I convinced myself that I deserved some happiness, even if it came at the expense of my marriage. But deep down I knew there was no excuse for what I did. I betrayed Dave's trust, and that was something I couldn't take back as the reality of my actions sank in. I couldn't help but wonder how I had let things spiral out of control. If only I had been stronger. If only I hadn't given in to temptation, maybe things wouldn't have ended up like this. But it was too late for regrets. The damage was done, and I had to live with the consequences of my actions. There was no way I could tell Dave that I'd cheated on him. He'd drop me like a hot potato if he found out. I had to keep it hidden, no matter what. I decided I wouldn't continue my fling with Richard, but I also couldn't bear the thought of Dave leaving me, despite our distance. And on top of that, he had a lot of work to do. I still loved him, though. He was the same guy I fell head over heels for back in college, driven, ambitious, and with a heart of gold. Richard could see the guilt written all over my face, and he tried to read me and assure me that I hadn't done anything wrong. Deep down, I knew he was lying, but his smooth talk and charm made it hard to resist. I knew I was being played, but Richard had a way of making me believe anything he said. If he told me the sky was green, I'd probably believe it. He was just that convincing. I got ready and headed home, trying to clear my head. Richard's words kept replaying in my mind. He said it wasn't my fault, and I wanted to believe him so badly. Dave still wasn't back, but I expected that. He said he'd be home the next day. I called in sick to work and decided to spend the day sleeping, hoping it would help me shake off the guilt and confusion and avoid Richard's tempting presence. I thought about quitting my job. I spent hours molding over, even after waking. I got up from my nap, but something kept nagging at me. Quitting felt like giving up. I told myself that I would go to work the next few days and hope things wouldn't be too awkward. If they were awkward, I would quit. But if they weren't, I'd continue. Honestly, I thought it would be awkward. But Richard kept on being really charming. He brought me coffee, helped with sales, and showered me with compliments. It made me feel weak, like I was failing all over again. At that moment, I made a choice. I decided to go. I decided to keep my relationship with Richard a secret from Dave. I figured that Dave would never even meet Richard, and that by the time he was available, I'd be working less so that I could spend more time with Dave. Once Dave was around more, I'd drop Richard and focus on my marriage. I thought I could have the best of both worlds, but looking back, I see how wrong I was. I was playing with fire, and it was only a matter of time before I got burned. That's how my secret affair with Richard carried on. We'd wait until the end of our shifts and sneak off. I went to his place. I even skipped driving to work, leaving my car at home so Richard and I could ride together. It was thrilling, and I couldn't get enough of it. I still loved Dave, but Richard's attention was like a drug, addictive and irresistible. It made me feel wanted. It was a feeling I hadn't had in a long time, and I enjoyed every minute of it. Dave was still as busy as ever, hardly ever home, but I didn't mind. Not when I had Richard to keep me company. I stopped caring whether Dave was around or not as long as Richard was there. I was content, deep down I knew. Richard didn't love me either. I knew it was only a matter of time before he got bored and moved on, but I pushed those thoughts aside, choosing to deal with them when the time came. I was happy to bask in the attention and affection Richard showered on me. Funny enough, I knew Richard had a girlfriend too, but they didn't live together. I had seen her pictures and their text messages on his phone, but I couldn't bring myself to complain or confront him about it because I was married. Dave loved me deeply, and I felt guilty for betraying him, but I was too caught up in it. I was caught up in the excitement of being with Richard and didn't think about the consequences of my actions. I know it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. At one point, I even started to worry that Dave was cheating on me too. I checked his phone and I even went as far as installing a keylogger on his phone, but there was nothing there to suggest he was cheating. It turned out that Dave was just working really hard and it was really paying off. He was bringing in a lot of money, and we were living in a massive 7-bedroom house with all the trimmings. We had a great house with all the latest gadgets, a home cinema, a man cave and even a swimming pool. We had a whole fleet of cars, too, all thanks to Dave's hard work. We also had a maid and a gardener who came by every few days, but they didn't live with us. That was my decision. It wasn't because I looked down on them or anything like that. In fact, I came from a really humble background. At one point Dave even had to cover my college fees. Believe it or not, I just preferred to keep things private and personal. We hadn't started a family yet, but that was a conscious decision we made together. We both agreed to wait a few more years, maybe until I was around 38 or 39. Dave wanted to be a hands-on dad, but he knew he was too busy with work right now to give that kind of attention to our kids. We decided to wait until Dad had more time to give to the kids. He was too busy with work at the time, so we put it off. Dave almost caught me red-handed. I had this habit of crashing at Richard's place when Dave was away. I figured I might as well hang out with Richard since I was going to be there anyway. That became our routine. If I had the next day off work, I'd stay over at his place. One day after work, Richard and I went to his house as usual. A few hours later, I got a call from Dave. He said he was back home and asked where I was. I was caught off guard because he hadn't mentioned anything about coming home early. He said it was a spur-of-the-moment decision. I had to get home quickly because I missed him. Public transport wasn't an option, especially since I'd stopped using our cars. I had to come up with an excuse. I told Dave I'd gone out for a bit because I was bored at home. He believed me, which made me feel even more guilty. Dave started asking questions. He wondered why I stopped using the cars to go to work. I made up a story about wanting to feel like a regular person and not wanting my colleagues to think I was trying to show off. The workers who needed the job to think I was trying to show off. It was a lame excuse, but Dave seemed to buy it. I was frozen in place like a deer caught in headlights. Richard must have noticed my sudden silence and followed my gaze to the Tesla. The look on my face must have given it all away because he frowned in concern. Finally, the light changed to green and Dave started to he was about to drive away, but before he could leave he continued recording and turned to Richard, asking, "Do you know she's married?" It was clear he was struggling to contain his anger after questioning Richard. He drove off, leaving me to face the consequences alone. Richard glanced at me, clearly taken aback by the sudden turn of events. I could see the gears turning in his head as he processed what had just happened. He knew. I was at Richard's place, and he could tell I was in a bad way. After what had just happened, he offered to drop me off at home, but I knew that wasn't a good idea. Dave could be unpredictable when he was angry, and I needed to give him some space to cool down before I could even attempt to talk things out with him. So I asked Richard to take me to my sister's. She lived close by and was great with Richard was a therapist, so he was pretty understanding. He dropped me off at my sister's doorstep before heading off. I tried calling Dave, but he didn't answer. I could tell from the other end of the line that my sister was pretty upset. I told her everything, about the affair, about the guilt, about the loneliness. She couldn't understand why I'd cheat on someone as perfect as Dave. He was the ultimate catch, good-looking, successful, kind. I felt distant from him and lost in our marriage as he got too caught up in work. Richard's attention was a temporary escape from the emptiness at home. My sister said I should have talked to Dave instead of cheating. I brushed off her suggestion, pointing out that it was too late for that and that Dave had just caught me kissing another guy at a red light. I spent a few hours at my sister's cooling off and trying to gather my thoughts. She made some food and was there for me. She helped calm me down. She even offered to come back home with me if I was too scared, but I told her that Dave, despite his anger, would never resort to violence. That just wasn't his style. After some time, I still couldn't reach Dave on the phone, but I decided to take a chance and head back home. As I approached the house, I noticed my belongings strewn across the porch. Dave had wasted no time in tossing them out. I knocked on the door, hoping to reason with him, but Dave was resolute. He claimed he had helped. Dave was kicking me out of the house. I pleaded with him, begging for a chance to talk things through and apologizing profusely, but he wouldn't budge. He insisted on me leaving, but at least he hadn't thrown my stuff out onto the street. He explained that he didn't want my belongings to be stolen, considering they were expensive. It was clear he was hurt and angry, and there was no convincing him otherwise. Dave's words hit me like a punch to the gut, no matter what excuses or explanations. I tried to tell him, but he wouldn't listen. I pleaded with him, saying that the affair was just a result of my loneliness and that it meant nothing serious. I promised I was planning to end things with Richard, but Dave saw right through my words. He was fed up with my excuses and called them, storming back into the house and leaving me standing there shattered and alone. His harsh words cut deep, accusing me of distancing myself from him for a reason he now understood all too well. Dave declared that it was clear that he was heading for divorce and there was no chance of salvaging our marriage. I suggested couples counseling with my sister, but he just laughed and said it was futile. It was obvious that he had made up his mind and there was nothing I could say or do to change it. I gathered my belongings and called for an Uber. Dave's parting words stung even more as he informed me that he had withdrawn his share of the money from our joint account. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but deep down I knew I couldn't argue with him. The truth was that Dave was the main breadwinner, earning nearly 10 times more than I did. He had always been financially savvy, diligently saving his earnings, while I, on the other hand, tended to spend more on things I enjoyed. I had grown accustomed to Dave taking care of our finances, never bothering to save much myself. Now that I was faced with the consequences of my carelessness, I couldn't help but regret my past decisions. I considered my options. My parents lived in another state, so I couldn't ask them for help. That left me with only 2 choices, my sister or Richard. Both seemed like risky options, with their own set of complications and uncertainties. But in that moment of desperation, I had no other choice but to reach out to them for help. On the one hand, my sister had this constant need to fix everything, which was starting to grate on me. She just couldn't accept that some things were beyond fixing and that some wounds were too deep. On the other hand, there was Richard, the guy who got me into this mess. If I wanted any shot at fixing things with Dave, I couldn't be anywhere near Richard. But with no money for a hotel and nowhere else to go, I reluctantly decided to give Richard a shot. Staying with my sister was risky, and her husband and kids were starting to get on my nerves. On the other hand, there was Richard, who got me into this mess. If I wanted any chance of fixing things with Dave, I couldn't be anywhere near Richard. But with no money for a hotel and nowhere else to go, I reluctantly decided to give Richard a chance. Staying with my sister was risky, given that her husband and kids might not be too happy about me crashing at their place out of the blue. I wasn't sure if they'd be happy about me staying with them out of the blue, so I called Richard first. But before I could even explain, he shut me down, saying he wasn't interested in us anymore and he'd decided to work things out with his girlfriend. He even hung up before I could say anything else. I could have told him off. I was truly on my own in this situation. It was beyond frustrating. Richard had left me in a difficult position, with no other options. I realized that I had to either crash at my sister's or face the reality of going to a homeless shelter. I was at my wit's end, so I called my sister and told her everything. To my surprise, she was more than willing to help. She picked me up in an Uber and took me to her place, where she greeted me with open arms. She made me some food and offered me a place to crash. I was really grateful for her kindness that night. I'd half expected her to turn me away. I dozed off for a bit, hoping to escape the mess for a moment, but when I woke up, my sister showed me this video Dave had sent her. It was a real shock. There was Richard leaning in for a kiss. The car, and then afterwards, Dave's voice could be heard asking Richard if he knew I was married. It was pretty obvious what Dave was trying to show. I was pretty shocked. My sister explained that Dave had reached out to her saying he wanted out of the marriage and wasn't interested in fixing things, despite her efforts. To talk some sense into him and suggest counseling, realizing the seriousness of the situation, my sister offered to put me in touch with a lawyer she knew, but she warned me not to get my hopes up. The chances of getting anything from Dave were slim to none. To be honest, I've made up my mind. I'm waiting for the lawyer's advice, but I'm not getting my hopes up too high. Dave has solid video proof of me cheating, which puts him in a pretty strong position. On top of that, the house is in his name, and there's even a prenup in place. Dave's always been the one bringing in the big bucks, and he's careful to protect his assets, hence the prenup. Realistically, there's little chance of me walking away with anything from this marriage, but I'll take whatever I can get. It's better than nothing. I guess karma really came back to bite me in the worst way possible. They weren't kidding when they said I got what I deserved. It's unfair that Richard, who helped me create this mess, won't face any consequences. I'm not letting him off the hook that easily. I'll find out who his girlfriend is and make sure she knows the truth. I've got evidence on my phone. I'm going to send her the evidence I have that Richard has been cheating on her. I'm not going down alone in this mess. In any case, this is a lesson to me that cheating never pays off. It's just not worth it. I need advice quickly. I got myself in a big mess because I dated his friend. Now he wants to divorce. I am in a very big mess. I made a mistake because I wanted something new and didn't think he'd find out about my affair. I didn't realize he'd want to end our marriage. I love him and don't see myself marrying anyone else but him. What I did was wrong and disgusting, but why is it only me who's suffering? I'm the only one suffering, even though I wasn't alone in this. I know I should have respected the vows I made in front of the Lord and our guests, especially our families. It was wrong of me to go against my vows and commit adultery while I'm married, but it doesn't change the fact that I wasn't the only one who did the wrong thing. I dated his friend, so if he was to end things with me, he should also end things with his friends. But life isn't fair on women's rights. All the guys have codes of friendship, right? I think they call it a FBRO code, a code whereby you vow not to either dating or getting into an intimate relationship with your friend's partner or sibling. The guy I cheated with had broken the code, but nothing was happening to him while I was suffering the consequences. I really need help with this. I'm somehow confused, but I'd also like to work on my marriage with my husband, Tony. He's 35 and I'm 33. We met at a mutual friend's wedding. Well, more like at my cousin's wedding. He was a friend of my cousin's husband. We were sitting at the same table. He's a very handsome, clean, and sophisticated gentleman. I remember on the day we met, I was wearing a very long dress, which somehow tripped me up and almost caused me to fall. I remember thinking that it would have been really embarrassing to fall in front of all the people in the hall. Luckily, Tony was there to catch me before I fell, as I was trying to stand up. His touch gave me goosebumps I didn't even know I had. Not to mention his soft hands, it felt so right when they touched me. Even his gentle gesture was something else. I felt what I can call love at first sight. He didn't try much or say many words, but his gentleness and handsomeness drew me to him. We spent the day chatting and laughing. It was great to be with him. He was in good company. He made me forget about everything else. It felt like nothing else existed except for him and I. I even forgot that we were at my cousin's wedding. I had found a friend and also a lover there. I thought I had found he was the one my soul needed. He was my answer to my prayers. He was gentle and kind, a big dreamer and a successful man who still had goals to be more successful than he was. I love a man who knows what they want and makes every effort to achieve it. Mind you, at that time I had a plan to start my own internet cafe and coffee shop. With Tony's expertise, I knew I had the resources to make my internet cafe a success. It felt like a blessing in disguise. With Tony by my side, I knew we'd make it. Since then, we became friends and he taught me a lot about it. I wanted to start an internet cafe because there wasn't one in Sicily, only in big cities, which was far from where I was staying. I wanted to help my community get easy access to the internet without even having to go to the big city for it. I set it up for students so they can easily access the internet and find school project information without having to spend more money to get to the city. Tony helped me start the internet cafe, which was very kind and generous of him. I was glad for the service. He was great at what he did. I was really grateful for all the help he gave me. I still think about how good he was with his hands and how he spoke to me. He had a way of making me feel really special. I still think about him months later. He told me he loved me. I had already felt something for him and I was falling for him, but I couldn't tell him I was protecting my heart from being rejected and my ego and pride. He told me how much he enjoys spending time with me and thanked me for giving him the opportunity to trust me. Tony was not from Sicily. He'd first come for the wedding, which was the first day that we'd met. Tony and I dated for 2 years. We were still getting to know each other well before we got married. It was the best option and it gave us time. I was happy that Tony wasn't in a rush to get married. We'd been together for about 1.5 years when he proposed. I loved him more and more. I don't know if I was getting obsessed with Tony, but I couldn't live without him. If he wasn't around or we weren't speaking, I'd feel like he was up to no good. You know when you try to contact your partner and his phone keeps putting you on hold or getting to voicemail at the same time? I was insecure and didn't want any woman to see Tony. Anyway, Tony and I were exclusive. He was based in Agrigento on the southern coast of Sicily, while I lived in Piazza Armera, about 1.5 hours away. He'd go home for a week or so, then come and see me whenever he could. Or I'd go to his city when I wasn't busy. Our love was like a flower that kept blossoming every time we spent time together or when we were communicating months later, after 2 years of dating. We got married on our dating anniversary. It's really nice and fulfilling to spend the rest of your life with the person you love. Your favorite person, who is also your partner. We got to share all our flaws, our dreams, our future and plans. After getting married, we moved to SEU, where we wanted to start our own family. We were living the dream and I couldn't be any happier. I mean, why wouldn't you be happy when you've been given a chance to? Spend the rest of your life with someone you fell in love with on the first day you met. I fell in love with Tony the day we met. I knew he was my soulmate and my caregiver. He didn't have to try hard to make me happy and feel complete. He knew how to make me feel better during my dull days. He always knew how to put a smile on my face. But I don't know how I would answer if I was asked why I cheated or dated his friend. I don't have a response for that anyway. After Tony started getting too busy to spend time with me, I needed his attention and wanted to spend more time with him. We had stayed far away from each other for almost 2 years when we were still dating. Ever since we got married, we had spent a couple of times together, going out to eat or to play games. My relationship with Tony was great because we would always allow ourselves to be young again, playing games or going out on ice cream dates. We used to go to exhibitions together and it was great. We had our own little world, living by our own rules. So one sunny Saturday Tony had gone out to buy meat. He'd asked me to prepare something since his friends were coming over to celebrate his other friend's arrival in Italy. I'd heard that he was in Los Angeles, but now he'd relocated to this side, so I prepared everything. Tony's other friends started coming with their partners. Of course everyone was having a good time until the man of the day arrived. You know, when someone says, "I feel like I am looking at Jesus himself," well, that was what I felt. His body structure was cleanly trimmed, his mustache was sexy, and his eyes were hazel blue. I was taken aback by the guy. He was really handsome. You know, the kind of handsome Leonardo DiCaprio. His eyes looked naughty, though, and I love being naughty. The guy wasn't at my wedding with Tony. I had heard that he was working since he was a doctor. The guy was introduced as Bradley Male, 33. His appearance was charming and... You know when you see someone for the first time and instantly feel attracted to them? That's how I felt with Bradley. I wasn't attracted to him just because he was handsome. Sometimes I even imagined us having sex. I imagined us riding and grinding against each other. My imagination got the better of me. I saw him exploring my whole body with his pinkish, sexy lips. Kissing every fiber of my body. I know it was wrong of me to drool and think like that. I was really attracted to my husband's friend, but I couldn't help it. He was everything I wanted and more. I just wanted to spend one night with him. It would have been enough for me. I know I'm a loose cannon, but how was I supposed to stop thinking about him? He was going to be staying with us for a while, until he got his own place. I was really feeling the pressure. I know it's wrong. I know it's wrong to have these kinds of thoughts about your husband's friend, but I couldn't help it. I felt like one night with him would solve everything. Bradley was a great guy, but he was too extreme. He was extremely handsome and spoke really well, which made any woman want to date him. A week later, we were still staying with Sly. I was with him most of the time. He's a very cool guy. He's carefree. He was really chatty and funny. He got used to the new environment really quickly and things were going well for him. I saw him doing workouts a few times in the morning. His abs were incredible, I felt like I could reach out and touch them. I had so many dirty thoughts for the poor guy and I really wanted to stop thinking like that with my husband's friend. During that week I remembered that I was in the kitchen preparing breakfast for both me and him. He came in when wearing only a very tight vest and jogging shorts. He just stayed with me in the kitchen, keeping me company. If only he knew that his company was a distraction for me. He started asking me about my relationship with Tony, wanting to know how it was. I told him what he needed to hear and found it enough to share. I couldn't tell him everything about my marriage. Yes, he was my husband's friend, but I couldn't tell him everything that is going on between Tony and me. Mind you, that time Tony and I had been arguing a lot lately about him. He was always absent, even when his friend was around. That led to a very heated argument between my husband and me. We were slowly drifting apart. Our connection and love would always be there, but we were drifting apart. I felt like he was trying to push me away. Even when he was under stress and pressure, he no longer confided in me as his wife. I would sometimes wonder who he confided in if he was shutting me out. The way he was doing it really hurt me. I had to beg every day for year I needed my partner to give me the attention I needed. The more time I spent with Bradley, the closer we got. I ended up confiding in him about Tony's behavior because it was really shocking to me. I didn't know who to talk to, so Bradley was the only person who was willing to listen to me vent about my marriage. I know I shouldn't have done that, but I just couldn't keep my sadness and heartbreaking moments inside. I was going to burst. Bradley had prepared snacks for us, including marshmallows and hot chocolate, which were my favorite when I was feeling unwell or down. I was grateful for the time and attention Bradley had given me and for letting me vent. I needed to get things off my chest. I was crying, and Bradley hugged me and promised he would speak to Tony, who had been distant recently, especially after our argument. Bradley started going to work early in the morning and came back late at night. Bradley's hug was exactly what I needed. You know the kind of hug that is warm and welcoming? The one that makes you feel like everything is going to be okay? So as we were still hugging, I found myself kissing him. We kissed and things got out of hand. A kiss escalated and we ended up doing the deed in the lounge. Mind you, at the time I had forgotten that Tony had recently planted CCTV cameras in the house. I had completely forgotten about that and Bradley didn't even know. Bradley and I kept seeing each other. Sometimes we had sex at my house, and sometimes we went to a nearby hotel. We couldn't stay the night because my husband might have noticed. We were careful because if Tony found out, we'd both be in trouble. Bradley was really sweet and gentle. He was very passionate. He knew how to explore a woman's body and make her feel foreign and end up speaking in tongues. He knew every spot to touch to make me submit to his commands. Well, he loved gentle, rough, intimate moments. I didn't even know that there was actually a gentle, rough type of intimate session. I learned a lot from Bradley. I learned about new positions that someone would think are extreme, but they are very enjoyable and nice. I was not a submissive wife to my husband, but with Bradley, I was submissive without even thinking twice. My husband loved missionary intimacy, while Bradley loved exploring new positions. I learned a lot. My own husband was a 1-round or 2-round type of person. Then he would get tired and fall asleep. Bradley, on the other hand, was a dragon. He was intense when it came to intimacy. He would make you go all night and even wake you in the morning. He would always leave my private area burning and tired. The guy knew his thing. Up until today, he was great in bed. I was with Bradley for about 9 months. We were still careful, but Bradley wanted us to be seen in public as a couple. I wasn't keen on that, as I loved my husband and was enjoying Bradley's company. He's really good for me and explores my body in ways I'd never imagined. I wouldn't divorce my husband just to be with him. He didn't understand that our relationship was just about intimacy. But the poor guy had developed feelings for me, which wasn't what we'd agreed on. It was purely and strictly about intimacy. A few weeks later, I ended my affair with Bradley. I felt like I'd destroyed my marriage and gone against my wedding vows. I shouldn't have allowed temptation and desires to control me like that. I should have respected myself and my marriage. I started to feel things for Tony Bradley, and it wasn't going well. We'd argue about his obsessive behavior. I don't know why he suddenly became so attached, even though we'd agreed there would be no strings. He attached strings to our arrangement, and it fell apart. I went back to my marital home. I want to move to a new place with Tony because the house holds so many memories, even the memory of me committing I'd never been unfaithful in my marital home before. I felt like I'd disrespected my husband, and there was no way to undo what I'd done. I knew I'd wanted Bradley at least one night, but it shouldn't have escalated like it did. A few days later, Tony was back at home. He was working at home most of the time, and I was feeling guilty. I tried to act normal around my husband, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew. I knew something was wrong. I couldn't bear looking at Tony and acting like a happy wife while I knew what I had done. Tony was as nonchalant as ever and didn't seem to notice anything. I missed the guilt and anxiety of my affair. They grew with each passing day. The following week, it was a Monday afternoon. I was watering the garden when our family lawyer came to the house. I was so confused by why Hamilton, our lawyer, would come to our house. I knew that he wouldn't come if it was not important or urgent, so I started getting palpitations. My mind drifted. I thought something must have happened to Tony. I couldn't bear to think of myself as a widow. My mind was racing. Hamilton asked to speak with me and said it was important. I knew he wouldn't leave his fancy office to come to my house if it wasn't important, so we went inside. He gave me an envelope and said Tony sent it. He told me to read everything carefully before signing. He said I was free to fight. He said I should try to save whatever would be lost after signing, but he didn't think fighting would be a good idea. The way he was speaking in riddles, I opened the envelope. When I opened it, I couldn't believe my eyes. I felt like my heart was stepped on by an elephant and my body was hit by a truck. I was lost for words. I told Hamilton that I wouldn't let Tony divorce me without a fight and I wasn't going to sign those divorce papers. I didn't know why Tony would want to divorce me that time. I hadn't considered that this could happen. I kept trying to work out the puzzles and asking myself why Tony suddenly wanted to divorce me just a few days later. Tony and I were in the magistrate's office with both our lawyers. I couldn't just let him take everything away from me. I was asked to say why I didn't want to sign the divorce papers. I told them that I couldn't let Tony, my husband, leave me without any explanation. He'd just woken up and decided that he wanted to divorce me and take our home. I couldn't just let him break my heart like that. When it was Tony's turn to speak or defend himself, he said some pretty hurtful things to me. He called me names and told me that he was regretting ever marrying me. He said that if he had known I was a witch, he wouldn't have bothered looking my way. The day we met, he was furious. Even Temple's veins were popping. He looked murderous and wasn't the Tony I'd been married to. He dropped a huge bomb on me. I'd forgotten about it. He told me he knew about my affair with Bradley, his friend. He said he'd seen me. I couldn't believe how he got the information. He told me that he had been acting like everything was normal and okay, but he knew all about my affair with Bradley. He said he wants nothing to do with me and that I should just go back home and continue running my internet cafe and coffee shop. I denied every allegation that he was accusing me of. I even denied being in any relationship with Bradley. While I was still fighting, screaming and kicking, Tony gave Hamilton a USB, and there it was, all the evidence. I was floored. I didn't know what to say, and I had no way back. I didn't even know how to defend myself. It was really humiliating and embarrassing. I tried to apologize to Tony, but he wasn't having it. I had no other choice but to obey him. I went back home and signed the papers. Even today, I still feel shaky when I think about everything that happened. I really miss Tony and I'm sorry for everything I did. What can I do to get my husband back? I can't just let him go like that. I need advice fast.